Ничего навязанного делать не будем. В русской сказке приговаривать «мерзни, мерзни, волчий хвост».
Vladimir Putin said the country has decided to cut crude production to support global oil prices.
I think the market is on its way towards balance. We have done obviously a lot more than others.
Are you ready to pay more for gas in the next few months? Well, you can thank Saudi Arabia and Russia for putting the latest squeeze on your gas bills. In one of the world's unlikeliest alliances, the two petroleum powerhouses recently decided to extend their shared agreement to cut oil production in an effort to skyrocket prices significantly. The plan has helped Russia fund its war effort in Ukraine and Saudi Arabia to support its 2030 initiatives, while at the same time sending the rest of the world into an energy crisis. So what will be the long-term effects of this move? And how badly will the rest of the world suffer? Welcome back to Money Matters. Every nation on the planet needs oil for many purposes, which makes it the most in-demand commodity. This means that high oil-producing nations have significant control of the world's biggest market. The United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia produce almost 40 billion barrels of oil every year, which makes up the majority of the world's supply. Now, if 2 out of the 3 nations decide to cut down on production volume, oil prices would surge through the roof and descend the world into an energy crisis, which is what is about to happen. In July 2023, Saudi Arabia internally decided to cut the production and supply of oil by as much as 1 million barrels per day, locking up their oil reserves. Russia joined in solidarity, shutting off 300,000 barrels per day. This forced prices to go over $85 per barrel in August 2023, with both nations quick to declare that the cutoffs were only temporary measures. Since then, the voluntary cutback was extended on September 5, 2023, and then again on October 4th. This time, they reaffirmed that the cutbacks will last until the end of 2023, which presents a serious problem for everyone else. The latest extension saw oil prices spike to over $90 per barrel, and economists are predicting it could snowball to the $100 mark before the year runs out. It's especially bad news, considering the demand for oil products is at a record high worldwide, despite the increased exploration of greener energy. Diesel, gasoline, and natural gas have all become more expensive for the consumer. In the US, the pump price of gasoline has risen to around $3.85 a gallon, and the diesel price is up to $4.60 a gallon. The increased fuel prices affect the roadies and residential car owners, while the diesel prices are a big blow to farmers and truck drivers. If farmers have to pay more for harvesting and transporting their goods, then no doubt food prices will go up as well. But the US is far from the worst casualty of this crisis. They have oil of their own. It's other nations like China, India, and Japan which could fall into an economic recession if the oil prices are capped at a high level. It realistically could send those nations into a recession. So, why exactly do Saudi Arabia and Russia need the prices to be this high? When the state-owned Saudi press agency announced the cut, it came with the hard tagline of supporting the stability and balance of oil markets for all OPEC countries. However, the actual reason for the decision is far more self-serving. Firstly, Saudi Arabia wants oil prices permanently high in order to fund their ultra-ambitious Vision 2030 project, a massive economic reform program that'll see the petrostate diversify its revenue. As things stand, almost 50% of Saudi's annual GDP comes from oil alone. With the future of oil being in serious doubt and an existential threat looming from the kingdom's ever-increasing list of enemies, Saudi Arabia drew up a plan to invest some of their money in other sectors, such as sports, tourism, and education. That way, they would have several channels of revenue rather than just one major source. Secondly, Saudi Arabia is actively trying to slow down the world's transition into renewable energy. Now, while increasing the price of oil might seem like an extremely ineffective way to do that, it actually works. High oil prices lead to higher inflation, which central banks around the world respond to by increasing interest rates, which in turn discourages all the borrowing that needs to be done in order to embark on expensive renewable energy projects. What's worse is that higher interest rates do a whole lot more than just stop ambitious renewable energy projects. They hold the very real danger of plunging entire nations into economic recession. This brings us to the third reason Saudi Arabia is hiking prices. America and the rest of the West is suffering, and Saudi Arabia doesn't seem to care anymore. The US and the Saudis seem to be falling out with each other after decades of shared alliance. The two nations operated a very smooth money recycling system where the US would buy oil from the Saudis, and they would use those dollars to buy weapons from the US. But in recent years, conflicts and idealistic beliefs have led the US to increasingly turn its back on Saudi Arabia as they try to undermine the Arabs' leading industry by ramping up renewable energy development. This means that not only does Saudi Arabia not care about the economic challenges of the West, but they could also be making active moves to deliberately worsen it. Which, if nothing else, is a goal they share with Russia. Since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the West has implemented dozens of economic sanctions against Russia in the hopes of undermining the Kremlin's war effort.
We will limit Russia's ability to do business in dollars, euros, pounds, and yen. We've now sanctioned Russian banks that together hold around $1 trillion in assets. That means every asset they have in America will be frozen.
Part of those sanctions include a specific price cap on all of Russia's oil exports. This price cap stood at $60 a barrel and was viewed as a genius move when it was first installed. It would ensure that Russia's oil wasn't cut off from the world, thus preventing a global scarcity crisis. Russia would also receive less funding than it needs to sustain the war. But Russia had other ideas. They successfully exploited several loopholes that enabled them to either sell at inflated prices or sell to new customers outside of Europe. One such loophole is the voluntary cutback of supply in alliance with Saudi Arabia. With oil prices at record highs and the supply of it short, nations had no choice but to buy from Russia at whatever price they demanded. Official reports state that while the average price of Russian oil is supposed to be at around $55 to $60 a barrel, it instead stands at a healthy $75 per barrel. And the Kremlin is openly bragging about it because what is the West going to do about it? Sanction them? With the extension of the production cut through the end of the year, Russia could further push its economy back to full strength in 2023. At the same time, Ukraine is knee-deep in debt and is wholly reliant on support from the West to keep resisting the Russians. If US and European support for Ukraine were to stop, then Ukraine would fall in a matter of days. Vladimir Putin's conquest of Ukraine would also provide Russia with an easy transportation route to many of its customers in Western Europe. What's more is that the economic stability brought about by successfully evading the Western price cap will allow Russia to further develop its Arctic base. The Arctic is home to over 13% of the entire world's untapped oil reserves. It holds endless geopolitical and militaristic possibilities, so whichever nation can get control of the Arctic first will have added a significant asset to its arsenal. Russia is currently leading the race and is using the Arctic as an alternative route to deliver its oil to its vital eastern customers. Russia and Saudi Arabia can't celebrate just yet, and it's not all smooth sailing to financial security from here. While they may not care for the welfare of the Western countries, they certainly have to care for the ones that are their customers. If they force the oil prices too high to the extent that it drowns out the economies of their customers, then the oil demand will crash, which would then force the oil prices back down. So the Saudis and Russians have a very important balancing act to do here. The US, the EU, and the UN are doing everything in their power to avert the impending energy crisis. Saudi Arabia and Russia are sitting pretty, funding their own massive projects and tightening what is one of the most unlikely alliances in world history.